better. There's no better content in any Tarzan Sunday ever, because it tells his origin story.
Mm-hmm.
From being his parents getting lost in the jungle and being brought up by apes and all that, taking his dominance as king of the jungle, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Now the condition of that piece wasn't great, but the significance of it was monumental for Tarzan collectors. Typically, Tarzan Sundays from 34, 33, 35, that neck of the woods, don't sell for that much money. They don't. As far as I'm aware, that's the only public sale of a Tarzan Sunday in excess of $30,000.
Okay.
I'm not now whether one traded privately for more than that. That's possible. Obviously, not all this stuff gets reported. But as far as public auction results, to my knowledge, there's never been one that's sold for that much money before or since.
Okay, so that's
typically when they sell, and again, this depends upon content. They sell in the $17,000 to $25,000 range.
Okay.
And that's good. Again, that's going to depend on content and what the images are. Obviously, images of Tarzan fighting or doing really distinctive Tarzan things are going to be more desirable. As opposed to ones where he's like just standing around talking to somebody.
Okay.
The content of yours is pretty good. I mean, I like the fact that it's got the he's like saving the girl. That's not Jane Porter, who's the most famous Tarzan girl, but that's a character called Sybil Stoneleigh.
Okay.
Who played a pretty big role. She was kind of like a modern 30s girl, like out adventuring on her own. She crashed her plane in the jungle.
Oh well, you really know your Tarzan stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
She hooked up with Tarzan for a while.
Okay.
I would say that, I would think that this piece, I mean, like if somebody asked me for an estimate on this piece, I'd say, 20,000, maybe a bit more. But I feel like it's important just to be clear that, it's unlikely that this piece is going to sell for, 30,000, 35,000.
Okay.
Because they don't sell for that much typically. Now, said, what happens sometimes within auction environments is that pieces sell for substantially more than people think they're going to sell for, including professionals like myself. And we just had a piece of not a newspaper strip, but a comic book cover come up in our last auction that the expectation was that it might hit 20,000. And it sold for 39.
Okay.
Just because a couple of bidders got involved, that's auction. That's the power of auction.
Okay.
Probably the best way for you to access the upside potential on this piece is within an auction environment. If you put it in a for sale environment, basically everyone's going to be looking at comparables. So if you price it let's say you price it at 30 in a for sale environment or something like that. People are going to poke around and see what other ones have sold for, from the same period, and they're going to look at the lowest numbers. And that's what they're going to target as far as what they're going to make offers at. And it's just the psychology of it,
Sure.
At auction, what you have is a different psychology, the flip side of that, which is that people aren't like, well, how little can I pay? It's kind of like, well, how much will I pay? How much will I have to pay?
Yeah, now when you do an auction, I'm sorry.
There's a few people like that involved, that's when you get that. That's when you get to those numbers where it's like, oh, wow, that's more than one's ever sold for before.
Okay.
Now, you were asking me a question.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
That's okay. When you do an auction, do you set like a reserve price?
We do reserves on pieces of that value level.
Okay.
I mean, you have to take into account though that it's a balancing act.
Sure.
Okay. Because the way that auctions function is through competitive bidding, right? So one guy offers 5, the next guy offers 10, the next guy offers 15, the next guy offers 20, the next guy offers 25, etc. Up the ladder. Okay.
Okay.
Within an auction with a reserve, the bidding's not really competitive. People aren't competing against each other until the reserve is met, because the piece isn't going to sell, right? Until the reserve's met, the piece isn't going to sell. So when people are bidding and there's a reserve in place, their thinking typically is, I'm going to wait for somebody else to trigger the reserve.
Yes.
And then I'm going to see what it is, and then I'll decide whether I'm going to bid or not. So there's a little bit of a, there's a little bit of a longer run up there to getting momentum when there's a reserve.
Okay.
So what we have to think about is like, okay, what reserve level would make sense relative to retail value, where that reserve can be met fairly quickly. It's protecting the downside, right? But still getting access to the upside.
Okay.
So let me give you a better example.
Sure.
Let's say we think the piece is worth $25,000 or whatever.
Okay.
If you put the reserve at $25,000, people are going to bid and bid and bid and bid and bid, and it's going to be at $20,000, $22,000, and it's going to say reserve not met. And basically what they're going to say to themselves is like, well, they sure want a lot of money for it, and they're going to move on to something else, because there's always other stuff to buy, right? If people are having to stretch to retail for a reserve number, you're never going to experience the competitive bidding that drives stuff up. Okay? But if something was to happen where, let's say, the reserve was set at 20% or whatever below where you think it might sell for, you're protecting the bottom, like you're protecting all that scary downside. But you're still leaving a little window of upside where somebody's going to see that piece and they're going to say, wow, well, that would be a good price to get that piece for. I'm going to bid on that piece. And then someone else is like, oh, yeah, well, it's still at a good price. I'd bid on that piece. And now you've got competition. And that's why positioning the reserve is very important. If you're going to put it in place, what you want to make sure you're not doing is that you're not holding the piece back by protecting the downside.
Right. Okay.
A piece isn't going to sell for more money because of reserve.
Okay.
I mean, it's going to be protected from tripping and falling on its face for some reason, which, a piece like, I'll be honest with you, pieces like this, I mean, pieces like this are sort of bread and butter. This is not stuff that there aren't lots of people looking for. So, typically, we don't see a lot of reserves placed on pieces like this, but that said, we understand that there's a desire, there's a certain risk aversion and there's a desire to protect the downside. So we do take reserves as long as we feel that they're attainable and that we will advise as far as what we think is best for the piece. So now, what sort of time frame are you guys thinking?
Well, it's not. I mean, he literally just called me yesterday and said he found this thing.
Yeah.
So it's not anything urgent. But my other question is, what about on your website, the other selling options?
Well, as I said, the other selling, basically with original art, a lot of, we do original art and we do comic books.
Okay.
Certain of the options you might be looking at are maybe a little bit more comic book specific than they are art specific, because there's a whole thing with comic books that involves grading and certification and stuff like that.
Right, I saw that. Yeah.
That doesn't play any role in original art. Really, with original art, we have two possibilities for you. Well, three possibilities. We have auction, which is what we've been talking about. We also have for sale, like a for sale environment where the piece is placed at an asking price. We have what's called the exchange, which is a for sale environment. Piece is placed at an asking price, and then registered users can make offers on the piece or buy it at the asking price. It's basically like an offer counter offer system. It happens through the system so that you're not, you wouldn't have to have any dealing specifically with the individuals who were making the offers. It would just be, you'd see that you're getting offers on the piece and you can respond to them. And then the third option, I suppose, would be a direct buyout.
Okay.
Which, is something we could talk about. Typically, when people are looking for direct buyouts, it's because they're looking for immediate capital.
Right. Yeah, we're not. We don't specifically need that.
Certainly that's something we could discuss if that's something you're looking to do. As far as our auction schedule goes, our next big auction that would be appropriate for a piece of this value level is going to be in May.
Okay.
Now, we've already started previewing it.
Mm-hmm.
We actually just earlier this week started establishing the public preview for that auction. So we're already into getting started with the promotion for that auction. So if we were to do something like, for instance, if you were to decide that auction was the route to go with this piece,
Mm-hmm.
and we were to place it, we could start promoting it basically immediately.
Okay, well, let me discuss it, with my dad.
Promotion time for that auction, which would be really positive for it.
I'm sorry, say that again?
You would get the full promotional. We just started promoting. I mean, we're going to be taking consignments for that May auction right up until the auction starts May 8th. We'll be taking consignments right up until like the last week of April, basically. And stuff that comes in late doesn't get the same promotion, obviously, as stuff that comes in early. So there is a benefit to consigning early to an auction, because it means that all of the promotion we do, as far as we do newsletter emails, and we do our own internal promotions, and we do a highlights catalog for the original art in the auction and all that. Pieces that are consigned early always get put into that. So pieces that are consigned late misses a bunch of that. So it's good to get in early, because people the buyers start looking and start plotting and planning kind of early as far as what they intend to bid on and what they intend to go after.
Okay. And do these auctions take place in New York or where? Or is it strictly online?
It's online.
Oh, it's all online.
It's online.
Okay.
We do not do live session auction.
Right. Okay.
It's not something that if you go to a live session auction for this kind of stuff, there are live session auctions still for this kind of stuff. There are very few of them.
Right.
There'll be 3 people there. There'll be 4 people there, and they're not bidding.
Yes.
they're just there watching.
Right.
And what they're watching is they're watching a bunch of guys at computers and guys on the phone taking bids.
Yeah. So so the whole thing's
because all
online.
All of the active bidders are online or they're on the phone. These are
collectors.
These are people who, in order to be able to afford to acquire a $20,000 or $25,000 piece of like this, these are doctors, lawyers, businessmen. They're people all over the world. They're not just in the U.S.
Right.
And so the internet's really the primary bidding source. So, and by doing that, by not holding live session auctions, it keeps our fee structure down.
Sure.
Which is a real benefit to our sellers.
Okay, and so speaking of that, can you email me the fee structure, or is it like?
You know what? I will if you want me to, but
Sure.
Very simple. It's 10% of the final sale price.
10%. Okay, and that's just
it.
flat, and that's it.
That's it. And there's not a 20% buyer's premium on the other end.
Okay, yeah, I've read about that.
Basically, what that means is that if the piece sells for $20,000, your net is $18,000. That's it. That's important. That's important to keep in mind, because there are lots of auction companies that'll say, okay, well the seller's commission is 10%, and you'll go, oh, that sounds reasonable. But then they're also charging 20% on the buyer's end.
Okay, which wouldn't affect.
That means that if the piece sells for, if the piece sells, quote unquote, for $10,000, right? Actually sold for 90% of 10,000, or I'm sorry, not even 90%. It's like 83%. So it'd be 10,000 divided by 0.9. It's basically they're taking a big chunk of the sale, and then the money they're breaking up isn't the total sale.
Okay.
It's the money before the buyer's premium's added on. We don't do that.
Yeah.
It's the hammer price. We take 10%, and that's it.
Okay.
Right. So you're gonna net more, of your sale price going with us over some other possibilities, because they're going to be hitting you with a big buyer's premium as well.
Okay. Now what?
It doesn't make any difference to a buyer. The buyers don't care about buyer's premium.
Right, but it would affect my bottom line. Is that what you're saying?
It would affect your net. Yeah.
Yes, my net. Okay.
Right.
All right. So let me discuss this with my father, and then where, if he decides he wants to proceed, where would we go from there?
Okay, that sounds great. And obviously, if there are any additional questions that I can answer, he might have questions that you didn't think to ask or whatever.
Right.
I'd be happy to address them. Just shoot me an email or give me a call.
Okay, so again, with our discussion about the reserve versus non-reserve, so you would maybe start this piece at what, like
Well,
20?
no, well, reserves are not where you start the piece. That's what's called a minimum. We don't do minimums in the auctions because it cuts out bids. A reserve is basically if the piece doesn't meet that level, it doesn't sell. Okay, so for instance, what I'm saying is all of the lots in our auctions just start at $1. Just all of them start at $1. But if a piece has a reserve, if it doesn't get to that number, it doesn't sell.
Okay, because my concern is like if you just started at $1, you know, I don't want to take a chance that it might, you know, just for some reason go for like 5 or 10. You know.
Well, it wouldn't.
Okay.
Right? Because I would pay you that for it right now. So, I'm serious. You know, so that shouldn't be your concern. If that's your concern, then you don't even need a reserve because it's not going to sell at that level. But what your concern needs to be is if let's say we let's just hypothetically say we think it's worth $20,000.
Okay.
Just because it's a nice round number. If your concern is that if it sells for 16, it's going to devastate you, then we should talk about a reserve. Okay. That's the kind of level that we're thinking about because the fact of the matter is that, you know, with the market, there are lots of guys looking for deals. Okay. And stuff like this is fairly liquid, so that means that, you know, if it can be bought cheaply at auction, it can be flipped pretty quickly retail for a higher number if it goes low at auction. So the market hates when something's going cheap because that's just money being given away. So the bidding, the piece isn't going to sell for $5,000 because there are so many people who would pay that for it. It wouldn't sell for 10 because there are so many people who would pay for that. But as you get closer and closer to retail, that's the thing. Is it like the risk? You know, if you want to get that upside potential, if you want to get that competitive bidding where the piece goes high, you have to take on a little bit of risk at the backside because you have to give it a little room to run, if you will. I mean, the one way to think about it is like, if you're playing roulette, you know, you can bet on red or black. And you have a very high chance, red or black, you have a very high chance of getting one of those two things.
Yeah.
If you win, you don't. It's not a lot of money. You know, you can bet on a single number, and you know your odds of winning are much lower. But if you win, you get a lot of money. It's kind of like balancing those two things. It's like what's the risk, what's the reward, and so the reserve positioning. That's what it's all about. It's like, well, you know, what's that number where it's not going to be a really horrible thing if it sells for that amount, but we're still giving it a little bit of room to like get some momentum going. Momentum is what makes it that bidding momentum is what gets it sold for a higher number than you think it's going to go for. You know, and that doesn't that doesn't happen until the reserve is met because the buyers are very are very savvy and they're going to wait. They're going to sit back. There's going to be one or two guys kind of like, you know, picking away at the reserve, just kind of looking, kind of testing the reserve. And other guys are going to be sitting back and waiting and seeing when it gets met. And then once it's met, that's when they start getting involved. Right. Because then it's going to sell. Once the reserve's met, it's going to sell. If they want it, they need to bid. So.
Okay. Well, I think you've given me enough information to discuss with my dad.
Really, like I said, it's just the question of reserve is just a question of like, well, where would we position it?
Right.
So what's the bottom line number you would need to have?
Okay.
In order to let it go, and we can figure out if we think that that's appropriate. Now, if when all is said and done, if that number we don't feel is low enough, then we could talk about a for sale offering. I mean, that's another way to go. It's just like I said, there is a typically when stuff like this comes to market, it does come to market within an auction environment. And the reason for that is because people are trying to access that upside. So.
Okay. Well, let me, mull this over and, again, discuss it with Dad, and then I can get back to you. Okay?
Great.
Right.
Look forward to hearing back from you.
All right, great. Thanks so much for your time. Take care. Bye.